liberal Zionists appear to be going through some things right now. They don't want to totally accept Bibi Netanyahu's framing of college kids as literal Nazis, but they can't just accept that perhaps these students protesting the murder of Palestinian civilians might have a little bit of a point. They're also not ready to 100% co-sign Jonathan Greenblatt of ADL's assertion that student protesters are Iranian proxies akin to Hezbollah or Hamas, but they would also like to try to undermine the protesters in their own special way. Because to admit that these are genuine humanitarian protesters would be to force a hard reckoning for these individuals who see themselves as virtuous and like to imagine that they would have stood alongside past protest movements against past injustices. But the current protests can't really be against injustices, right? Can't be that college kids are genuinely horrified by kids being blown apart and crushed under rubble. Must be something else, right? But what could that something else be? That's where things get really interesting and the mental gymnastics get really wild. So let's start with this one. Professor Scott Galloway, Don Lemon, and Bill Maher, they got together last weekend to offer their insightful analysis of exactly what's going on here. Now, for Lemon and Maher, opposing genocide is just a fad that all the cool kids are into. Galloway had a bit of a more unique take, though. Take a listen.
Part of the problem is young people aren't having enough sex, and so they go on the hunt for fake threats. And the most popular threat throughout history, type into Google anti-Semitism and pick your century, and you're going to find it. No. A Jewish girl on her way to get a manicure is not your mortal enemy. Stop it, for God's sake.
So there you go. College kids, they're just not having enough sex. So they became rabid anti-Semites in response. Do you people realize how insane you sound? Yeah, I'm sure if they were just getting laid more often, they'd stop caring about babies who are starving to death. That must be the real issue here. Galloway, by the way, seems to apply this sex analysis to all kinds of things that young people are into. I remember distinctly how he berated young men for bidding up GameStop rather than trying to get laid. Appears this is kind of a whole ideology for him and is deployed every time the youths do something that he can't quite explain or wrap his head around. Meanwhile, CNN's Fareed Zakaria, he had a somewhat gentler version of Galloway's take, wrote an entire column for CNN wrestling with why it is that college campuses have become a center of protest. That's never happened before. For Fareed, it's not because students are horrified by their tax dollars being used to drop 2,000-pound bombs on refugee camps, or because of a backlash to the authoritarian crackdown on those protesting these atrocities. It's really because these students are lonely. In a piece titled, "Why the Gaza War Has Spun Campuses into Chaos," he writes, "It's difficult to know what to make of the turmoil on college campuses these days. The protests, polarization, intimidation, and general bitterness." In a revealing article in the Wall Street Journal, higher education reporter Douglas Belkin sets these events against a broader backdrop, the disappearance of a sense of community. He points to research demonstrating that college students today are lonelier, less resilient, and more disengaged than their predecessors. University communities they populate are socially fragmented, diminished, and less vibrant. One wonders whether this loss of community has led to more distrust, sharper disagreements, and more anger. People are encountering one another at these protests, often for the first time, often as strangers. Zakaria goes on to talk about RAs who are upset that students went to Zoom into dorm meetings rather than go to them in person. And look, it's legitimate to talk about the erosion of community in America. We've done it too, in general and on campus specifically. But I find it baffling how difficult it is for so much of the liberal elite class to just accept many people are profoundly upset by children being starved and killed en masse. I see this response actually all the time. Why are you so emotional? Why do you care about this so much? I don't know. Maybe because I've spent the last 7 months seeing kids being amputated on without anesthetic, bodies buried alive still screaming, listening to the panicked call from a little girl named Hind, who watched her family murdered and was then assassinated alongside her would-be rescuers. What kind of a sick person we have to be to not be emotional about these things? And yes, it should be tense when you're interacting with those who would seek to justify those sorts of atrocities. To Mr. Zakaria, these tense and emotional reactions, they're actually a sign of mental health, not dysfunction. They're a sign of humanity, not disconnect and indifference. We're not done yet. Nate Silver had a phenomenal contribution to this weird inability to understand that young people are horrified by horrors. Since his brand is being the rational data guy, he opined that these other, more impressionable human beings are just responding to base tribal instincts. Silver's contribution was sparked by the musings of Substack writer Philippe Lemoine, who wrote this on Twitter, quote, My basic model of student protests is that in general, students don't know shit about what they're protesting against. They do it because it's cool. Makes them feel like they're part of something important and they want to be with their friends. In the vast majority of cases, their beliefs on the topic are very superficial. They just repeat slogans they don't really understand, but that's not a problem for them because it's primarily about signaling group membership rather than loyalty to specific ideas. To which Silver replied, "This is probably right. Most people don't form political opinions through deep examination of the issues or reasoning from first principles. It's more like picking some particular fashion label or way of dressing, especially for younger people who face more peer pressure." First of all, have any of you guys actually talked to these young people? Because if you do, you'll find many are deeply informed. In fact, plenty have a direct connection to the conflict themselves. Perhaps you should speak, as Ryan and Emily did, to the young woman organizing at the Columbia encampment who was both well-informed, well-adjusted, and quite insightful. Perhaps you should speak, as we did, to Motaz Salem, who has been confronting members of Congress on Capitol Hill and is now involved with GWU's campus protest. Motaz has lost 100+ family members in Gaza. I would wager he knows a hell of a lot more about it than Nate Silver does. Here's the other thing, though. Liberals love to use this "it's complicated and you just don't understand" as a dodge on Israel and Palestine, but it's actually not. Innocents are being slaughtered. You don't need a PhD in Middle Eastern studies to be a human being who thinks that's wrong, and is, yes, quite emotional about that. Opposing genocide is not some cool, fashionable trend that kids are just jumping on to have fun and make friends. Do you understand, Nate Silver? These young people are taking tremendous risk. They're facing tremendous consequences. Their schools are putting snipers on the roof and sicking cops on them. They're being pursued by private investigators and they're being arrested. Billionaires are doxing them and promising to end their careers before they even begin. But you think they're just risking it all for an in-group fad, cool thing to do? Is your soul really so deadened you can't even conceive of idealistic young people sincerely just opposing a genocide? Even if you don't think it's a genocide, they do. And many scholars and international bodies, by the way, agree with them. But you can't fathom being outraged by such a thing? That says far more about you than it says about them. But I couldn't end without one of my favorite contributions to this whole discourse came from this VC startup investor lady who professed that she was deeply confused by all of this campus activism. She wrote, "Can I ask, why do all these students from top schools want to be activists to begin with? Like, you got such high grades in SAT scores. I'm surprised so many of you apparently want to be MLK instead of lead some industry." Now, books could be written about the mindset and ideology that would lead to such a question and to such confusion. It's honestly pitch perfect Gen X liberalism, from the fixation on the high grades in the SATs to the deep befuddlement at smart students wanting to emulate MLK, literally one of the most consequential men in all of American history. It speaks to a mind that has fully embraced the notion that the only achievements which are worthwhile are to be found in the capitalist marketplace. Get your startup funded, make enough money to become an angel investor, wrap it all up in a female empowerment narrative to put a nice virtuous bow on all of it. Do well by doing good, they said. She can't conceive of organizing a protest movement as a legitimate achievement unless it's part of an Ivy League college admissions essay or a line in your bio for Forbes 30 Under 30. By the way, after being relentlessly dragged, she did delete the tweet. But you know who's having no trouble understanding and appreciating the college campus protest movement? Palestinians in Gaza. In what is a truly beautiful display, Palestinian children and young adults in Rafah held a rally to show their appreciation for the American solidarity. Some even spray painted their tents with messages like the ones that you can see here. This says in part, "Thank you, students in solidarity with Gaza. Your message has reached us." Another one directly said, "Thank you, Columbia." Yeah, thank you, Columbia. Thank you for risking your career futures in the hope that Palestinians might have a future at all. And Saagar, I couldn't even put into this monologue.
Hey guys, if you want to see what I had to say to Krystal's monologue, not just this one, all of them, going back to the very beginning, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com.